Great and holy men and women are made in times of crisis. Are you one of them? In this COVID pandemic crisis, which has devastated our economy and relationships in society, we have an opportunity to become holy and great. And how do we become holy and great in this crisis? Easily, by doing our duty. In World War II, it was the citizens and soldiers simply doing their duty who made the greatest generation. Our generation has an opportunity to become great by simply doing their duty. Like World War II, citizens who went to the manufacturing jobs to build the industrial war machine and made sacrifices of food and comfort by rationing and creating victory gardens. So their lives were impacted, and it was simply duty that they were doing. We have an opportunity to be great by doing our duty. Hello everyone, today's episode is about doing our duty and the virtue of obedience, and how doing our duty brings us peace, stability, faith, and hope. The best person to teach us duty is the great General MacArthur, who led the U.S. Marines in the Pacific and in Korea. Not theoretical, but practical. Real-life Catholic advice from Practical Catholic.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins in 1979. I was only here in America for about 4 years when the great energy crisis of the 1979 occurred. This is when OPEC, a consortium of Arab oil companies, basically put an embargo on oil to the U.S. When America was heavily dependent on foreign oil and was very much addicted to oil and gas. At that time, we had large, fancy muscle cars with 8 cylinders. They were as heavy as a tank, and they were guzzling gas. I remember when I got my first car, my father gave it to me. It was a 1971 Chevy Impala. That thing, when I worked, it took my whole salary almost just to pay for the gas. And that's how much they were gas guzzlers. So life as we knew it had changed. We had a national crisis. There was a gas shortage all over the United States, and we had to wait in line. In New Jersey, where I grew up, we had a system of red, yellow, and green flags. Red meant that the gas station had no gas. Yellow meant half a tank. And green meant that you could get a full tank of gas. I've talked to other people about the crisis and how other states handled it. They basically had lottery cards, from my understanding, and if your number came up, then you would get gas. So every state handled it differently. But the common theme of all of this was that we had to wait. We had to wait our turn. Gas economy cars, as we know, it would change. So we know that the virtue of patience was very much needed, but it was their duty to be patient. After this crisis, the cars would change. We would go from heavy cars to lighter cars. Gas economy cars came out. The 80s was the year of cheap gas-efficient experiments, from the Yugo to the cheap and small Honda cars, the Pinto and such. So what was amazing about this crisis was how the American people came together to overcome it. And it took about basically a year and a half to overcome this crisis. And I was amazed at my father. Like most Americans, were usually calm and waited their turn for gas and patiently waited to get more gas. My father almost felt like it was his American duty to be patient, to wait in line for gas. He did not complain, or at least not in front of me. Duty for him was doing what the government asked of him, just like they did in 1941, in World War II, and 1930 in the Great Depression, 1917 in World War I, and many other crises America faced. I have seen a lot of crises in my life. The ones that deeply hit me were the First Persian Gulf War, 9/11, and the Second Persian Gulf War, the economic collapse of 2008, and now the coronavirus. The uncertainty caused by the virus has wreaked havoc in the economy and daily social behaviors in life. I've never seen something hit America and even the globe like this. This is something that's important to understand, that this crisis is unique in a couple of ways. In the global effect of it, a lot more even global than even 9/11, and how it affects social behaviors. It has affected our churches. It has affected, how we work, and of course our economy. So it's very easy to get down and very easy to think about it. But right now, our government, our society, both in the Catholic Church as well as in politics, is so divided. And this division is not caused by so much of Democrats and Republicans or the attitude of the traditional Catholic versus the liberal Catholics. It's an issue where we've lost this idea of duty, that we have a duty, whether it's in the Catholic Church or whether it's in our government. When the government asks us to do something, we should do it because it is our duty as American citizens. And we've lost this idea of it. We have gotten into this independent, that everyone's right is more important than following the duty to protect society in itself, as long as those rules are morally acceptable. Okay? So this crisis really has helped many of us to become great people and great saints, simply by just following what the government asks us to do. All right? Now, here's a definition of duty. The definition of duty by Webster is a moral or legal obligation. We have a moral or legal obligation. In the Catholic Church, it is important and emphasized to do our duty. It's our duty to go to church every Sunday and a holy day of obligation. It is our duty to, in fact, it's called the Easter duty, to receive the Eucharist at least once a year and to go to confession once a year. And they typically do it on Easter season, which is the Easter duty. Duty. It's important. My son was working at the grocery store when he was, over the summer, as well as when the schools let him go early because of the COVID. And he was working at a place called Stu Leonard's. It's a grocery store. And then we were reading how President Trump had wrote a letter sent to the food industry saying that the food industry, a.k.a. the grocery store, like my son was working at, had a personal duty to do their job. And I was pretty amazed at that statement because, he really put a war on this COVID aspect of it. And even though that my son was taking a risk going to the store of catching COVID, people needed to do that. Just like we needed soldiers to go fight in battles and everything else. And we got, criticized, for allowing our son to work in the grocery store. But again, it's the duty of young men and women to fight the wars that we need to. Now, this war is not one of guns and bullets. This is one of survival. And the food industry is one of the most critical areas that we need to have so that people could still eat and be provided for food. So it was amazing. And I had this really vision of my son being really a soldier and doing his duty. And I was very proud of him. He kept going in, and we would discuss it every once in a while. And we made sure that his grandparents were not around and everything. My in-laws lived literally 5 miles away from us, and they were quarantined, and we made sure that they didn't come to our place, or if they did, they were we were out on the porch and those types of things. So we did protect ourselves and protect those we love as well. But it was important that he do his duty. And I told him that. I said, I'm proud of you for putting your life on the line and protecting yourself. Just like the factory workers in World War II. Do you know most of the targets in Germany were, the primary one was military, right? Well, when we bombed Germany and Japan. But the secondary targets were always the manufacturing buildings. the builders, the manufacturing, because they were the ones that were building the bombs, the bullets, the tanks, and the guns. So in World War II, when you were working at a manufacturing company, and you're putting your life at risk, because if the Japanese ever got into the homeland, you would be the second target, second only to the military targets that needed. So same thing here. The frontline workers, the war has been different. And so my son did his duty. And that's what makes him great. And one day in the future, he could tell his kids, yes, I did my duty. I worked at a grocery store in a dangerous environment. Okay? So let's define duty. Okay? Now in the Marines, the word duty was used all over the place. We had KP duty, that's kitchen duty. That was the worst thing you ever wanted to do. You had official duty. As an officer of the Marines, I'm actually considered a police officer. We had to memorize the Miranda rights, and I could arrest people. We had active duty. That means I was not in the reserves or anything. I had to be a full-time Marine. Those are a couple examples of duty. We had duty over the weekend. That's what we called it. Duty meant that you were standing on guard. And it's important. So but in the religious life, I am a Franciscan tertiary. I have a duty to do the liturgy of the hours, Marian prayers, meditation and prayers. These are my duties that I have to do. As a Franciscan tertiary, a priest, it's their duty also to do liturgy of the hours, to say mass, to celebrate mass every day, to do other things that probably I'm not aware of, but it's their duty. And the fascinating thing about doing your duty is that it brings balance, it ensures that we progress, it provides stability and peace. I'll give you an example. When you look at a veteran, and to be honest with you, there's two types of veterans. There's wartime veterans and there's peacetime veterans. And I know we put a lot of credit on on the wartime veterans, and this is not to take away from the wartime veterans, but there is a great credit on the peacetime veterans, and the reason why is because there's no glory in peacetime, being in the military in the peacetime. All you're doing is the same thing over and over and over again. You just keep training. Training for what? The big game. When is the big game? We don't know, because war can happen at any time. So there is no glory in the peacetime. But it's in the peacetime that doing your duty is so important, because it avoids war. That's what it does. Peacetime soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen prevent war from occurring. They defend this country simply for doing their duty. That's what happens. Because no nation, no country wants to go and attack another country if they see a well-educated, a well-armed military. The one that does their duty, even in times when it's boring to do your duty. It's very boring. It's very boring to do your duty and to keep practicing over and over. It's like being in a sport where you keep practicing over and over and over again, and you never get a chance to play the game. Not a game. You're practicing, you're getting yelled at for all the mistakes you make, and you never have a chance to play the game. But it's the duty at peacetime of those sailors, airmen, soldiers, and Marines that defend our country. This is the importance of duty. That's what happens. So it is with obedience. So my favorite saint is St. Thomas More. Okay, he exemplifies duty for both an earthly king as well as the king in heaven, God. And so if you don't know the story of St. Thomas More, let me synopsis it a little, give you a little synopsis of it. St. Thomas More was, very good friends with King Henry VIII. And he became chancellor. Okay, a chancellor of a kingdom is the person who actually executes the laws. He makes sure that day-to-day operations are being well maintained. He is, in effect, almost second to the king in this kingdom. Okay, so he had full power, full everything, full confidence over the king, and so he followed. But he was a saint. So he followed all the orders of the king. Well, it would come to a clash when Henry VIII would ask for a bill of divorce from the Pope, and the Pope said no. And so he then decided to segregate the Church of England by decreeing that he is the head of the church in England, and de facto causing the Church of England to become schismatic. Okay? So it was in this schism, right, at this time, that St. Thomas More was Chancellor of England. And so the king requested that all people take an oath that would make pretty much would align himself, the king, as the head of the church. And so St. Thomas More would slowly avoid the bullet. Eventually, he would resign and leave. And then eventually he would not take the oath. He would further, as other people are taking the oath, he refuses to take the oath. And so there was a lot of treachery within the king's cabinet, and they were able to pretty much lie and trick Thomas More. And so they found him guilty of treason, and he was beheaded. But listen to his last words before he was beheaded. Thomas More said, I was the king's good servant, but God's first. So there is no dichotomy between serving God and the king as long as there's legitimate moral laws. That's something that Thomas More really wanted to emphasize. There is no dichotomy serving a government and God, as long as the laws are moral, as long as they follow the guidelines of the God's moral law. And it's very easy to do that. The Ten Commandments summarizes the moral law that we need to guide our principles on. And they're very simple. Who wants to kill another person? Who wants to allow lies to occur? Who wants to allow unfaithfulness, stealing? Nothing. It destroys a community. So Thomas More shows that. And it was in his duty as chancellor that he executed things perfectly with great zeal, not just for his king, but for his God. Let's talk about the Bible and the emphasis of doing our duty. So Jesus says in this little story, he says, "Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron, and serve me while I eat and drink? Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" That last sentence, "we've done only what we ought to have done," can be summarized in one word, and that is duty. Duty is what we are to do. Duty as Catholics and duty as citizens of the United States. And so, it's amazing because so many people, traditional Catholics especially, will emphasize that we are a church militant. We are a church militant. But when they act and behave, they don't act like a military soldier, I could tell you that. And the reason why I say that is because I see a total disobedience in their behavior. In most cases, in the military, it's about duty, following the duty of your commanding officer, of those who are in charge, your sergeants, your corporals, whatever they are. But we only want to do what we want to do. That's what happens. But if you really want to follow that we are a church militant, then the first thing we got to do is our duty. the first thing to emphasize is our duty to our church, a duty to our country. As Catholics, sometimes we like to pit the secular government over the church. That's what we like to do. And, this is the whole thing about the two things, right? I always group things into categories of two sometimes, right? And, for example, faith versus works, right? Or Bible versus tradition. Here's what we do is there's the two, secular government, the government, or the church, right? And the one thing I always emphasize is Satan does not lie. He deceives, yes, but he does not lie. He doesn't say black is white and white is black. He just likes to use the truth and use it to the extreme, right? What is vice? Vice is when you're not in the middle, we're not centered. It's either one or the other. We're either too much of it or we lack something, right? That's what Satan does. He likes us to put things into extreme, right? So we have this idea that the government is bad, okay, and the church is always right, or the church is bad, and the government is always right. And we can see that, right? And not to keep saying the left or right, but it's just easier to show. But the left will pin all hopes on secular government and change in disregard to religion, right? But the right will pin all hopes on religion in disregard to government intervention, right? So we see this whole right and left side, and we need to be in the middle because government is important, and government sometimes do need to intercede, okay? Even St. Paul writes that, okay? And St. Paul had a regard for the Roman government, because at the time, the people who were really persecuting St. Paul, at least in the beginning, were not the Romans. It was the Jewish religion, because Christianity at that time is a heretical sect of the Jewish faith. So it was the Jews that were really persecuting him. And he looked at Rome as being, one of, that they were going to be helping them out. And Rome was just a government at that time for him, okay? So it's not left where everything's on the government with disregard to religion, or the right where everything is religion, nothing in the government. It's in the middle. It's what St. Thomas More did. He was able to use his religion to guide the government in its right purpose, the right form, okay? As Catholics, it is very easy to really disregard our government with suspicion, with some kind of disobedience with the government, especially because we're constantly fighting the pro-life or the traditional marriage or, secular education, with sex education and secular education. It's very easy when we're trying to fight those things to think of government as our enemy. And it's not. It really isn't, because majority of what the government does is legitimate and right and moral. Yes, we do have some issues that the policies need to change, right? Like abortion, like traditional marriage, like secular, sex education in the secular classrooms. Yes. But there's a lot of other things that the government does that's important, okay? So we can fall very much into this extreme disobedient behavior and think that the government is bad. It's the old adage, throwing the baby with the bathwater, right? So it's important to understand that not everything that the government does is wrong. In fact, there's a lot that is good in the government. We do need some government intervention, okay? If you look at the police department, that's part of the government. The military is part of the government. People, when they ask me, will you ever work for the federal government? I say, well, I was in the military, which is considered the federal government, right? They're there. We know that the government can help. Yes, is it misguided in certain policies? Yes, that's what we need to correct. That's what it's all about. So we need to be obedient, and we need to do our duty, again, not just in the secular world, in the government, but we also need to do it in the Catholic Church especially if we're going to have this idea we are a church militant, which we are, okay? We have to do our duty. And who are our leaders in our duty? Well, it's the deacon, it's your priests, it's your bishops, it's the Pope. Those are your military leaders in the Catholic Church. And so we must be obedient and do our duty in doing that. But what happens? What are the common problems we see? And I see this especially to people who are, claim that they're great Catholics, they're traditional Catholics, right? They're church militant Catholics. What we see is this idea of dissent, that they can dissent and criticize the Pope, the bishops, the priests. That's what I hear all the time. Oh, why aren't the bishops allowing masses to occur? Why aren't priests disobeying them? To provide for the mass. Okay, why? It's an infringement of rights. I've seen them say, "Oh, it's my right to go to mass." I've seen people go to schismatic churches because they think it's a right to receive the Eucharist. Because they think that is the way, because God is calling them. A schismatic church, okay? So, and I have nothing against schismatic churches, but today I celebrated a Franciscan feast, okay, that of the martyrs of France during the Reign of Terror. That when the French Revolution occurred, they were forcing priests, okay, to take an oath to, again, making the government the head of the church. And they refused to sign and take an oath of the schismatic oath, they called it, the schismatic oath, because that's what it was causing, schism, okay? And because they were causing schism, they said no, and they were all killed for it. And yet, we are flocking to schismatic churches so that we can have the right of the Eucharist? First of all, the Eucharist is not a right. It is not a right. Okay? God giveth and God taketh away. It is God freely giving it as a gift. And sometimes we are not given that gift, maybe for one reason or another. Maybe God realizes how spoiled we are and that we need some time off of receiving Him. Okay? Instead of the why, we should emphasize the what. What is God teaching me? A better fervor for God, a spiritual communion, and not be so focused on my rights. And I see this also in the secular world. You're infringing on my rights. Okay? You're infringing on my right to open up and run a gym or open up and do whatever it is. Okay? I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not a legal person about that. But, we do have a crisis. Okay? We do have a crisis where, of the COVID, people are dying of it. And so the government is trying to do the best they can to contain it. Okay? And maintain our economy. We need to be able to, understand that it's not our right always to disobey, to not do our duty. All right? For a majority of us who are not business owners, I am a business owner, so I know what infringement of businesses feels like because businesses, affect me. But from a simple standpoint of what we need to do is, all we need to do is wear a mask, okay, and stay socially distant, okay, from most of us. That's all we need to do, okay? And they're not asking us to go to the moon or anything like that. So this is the things that are, and maybe, possibly wash our hands, right? We need to wash our hands and maintain ourselves. So that's problem one. We dissented into really this issue that anything that the government does or anything that the Catholic hierarchy does has to be wrong and want a criticism and infringement of my rights. Number two is selfishness. All right. It's always about them. It's always about us. Oh, what about this? What about that? It's my rights, and I'm never wrong. So there must be always right. I'm never wrong. So they must be wrong then. Right. So it's about themselves. The third is it's about disobedience. I read emails in people saying, we should influence our priests to disobey their bishops. Is that really, really necessary? Right? We should influence our priests to disobey their bishops. That is the most wrong email that you can ever think about as being a Catholic. Okay? The issue of churches being closed is not one of morally wrong. Certainly, is it, prudentially wrong? Possibly. But prudential and morally wrong are not the same thing. Okay? They're not the same thing. If the bishop has said, we need to go kill people, I would say yes, we could be disobedient to that. Okay? But they're doing the best they can with the circumstances that are transpiring both at a governmental level as well as a virus level. So charity needs to be instituted so that we can be fully obedient to these bishops and never to influence our priests to disobey their bishops so they can have Mass. Okay? That's not appropriate. And that's not even, I pray for the people who are doing that. Okay? I pray. Because, the first thing that Satan said was, I will not obey. Disobedience was his first and foremost act. Okay? Physical act to God. Disobedience. I will not obey. Out of his pride, that's what he said. Okay? So, is that what you want to align yourself to? I will not obey? Fourth is lack of trust. So many people think that it's them that can control the world, or it's them. I have to take matters in my own hand. The Catholic Church has existed for nearly 2,000 years. Okay? The whole economy of salvation is older than even 2,000 years old, going all the way back to Adam and Eve. Do you not think that God knows what's going on? Do you think that the Catholic Church is going to collapse because that Mass wasn't celebrated for a day or two, or that because bishops are, giving a dispensation? The Church will exist. The Church will always exist. It is God's church, not my church. The thing we need to worry about is, will I be part of that church, regardless of the crisis and trials that occur? Or am I taking matters into my own hand? Am I willing to go to a schismatic church just because they provide the Mass and I don't, and because they are doing what I think should be done? No. Obedience is not easy. Okay? You tell any soldier, ask any soldier if obedience is easy when they're asked to go to fight a battle. You ask a soldier if obedience is necessary when they have to defend a line when they're outnumbered 8-1. Okay? No, obedience is not. Obedience isn't easy. It never was easy. If it was easy, then you're just caving into your own selfish things. So obedience is always difficult. It's always confusing. Why would I need to defend this line? Why can't I just retreat? Why do I need to attack this hill? Right? In Vietnam, in the Battle of Khe Sanh, the first patrol they sent out was a group of Marines, 22 Marines, versus 40,000 North Vietnamese. It was a suicide. All because the commanding general wanted to know how what the effect of the bombs were. And so 22 Marines were killed. So obedience isn't easy. Obedience, that lieutenant just said, this is ridiculous. It's a suicide mission. That lieutenant did the best he could to protect the 22 Marines under him and himself. But he knew the odds were against him. 40,000 NVA versus 22 Marines. Obedience is not easy. The lack of trust. That lieutenant trusted the general. Yes, maybe I might die doing this, but maybe he needs that information to protect the greater good. And so God does, things that we might not understand. But it's this lack of trust that we have to take matters into our own hands that causes disobedience. Okay? That's what Adam and Eve did. They took matters into their own hands. They disobeyed God out of fear of Satan in the garden, when they could have simply just eaten the tree of life. But they chose to take matters into their own hands. That's why God gave them the tree of life. Even if Satan were to beat up Adam and Eve in the garden, they could have come back to life again, eating the food from the tree of life. What I also see a lot of times is lack of peace and anger. The anger and rage of some of these emails that you see about the criticisms of the bishops and everything else. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they've made a decision, right? And they're trying to figure it out themselves. This is what a crisis is all about. This is what's happening. And they have the right, because they are the bishops. They are the popes. Just like generals have the right to make a decision that affect my life as a Marine. They do. Generals can say, Lieutenant, and to be honest with you, the general won't even tell me that. I'll get the order from the captain. The general will tell the colonel will tell the captain, and the captain will tell me as a lieutenant. That's what's going to happen. So I don't even talk to the general. The general will say, hey, I need to know the enemy strength out there. Send out a patrol so I can see the effects of these bombs and see what's going on. And so the colonel says, well, let's send out 22 Marines. Okay, who are we going to select? Hey, let's select Bravo Company. And then Bravo Company, the captain will say, hey, Lieutenant Cease, okay, a first platoon. Create a 22 Marines, grab 21 Marines and send them out there and see what we're doing. That's how it works. And obedience says, aye, aye, sir. That's what obedience says, aye, aye, sir. How are we going to make this work? And not, oh my goodness, it's a death sentence. Do you realize there's 40,000 NVA out there? We don't even know if they survived that bombing or not. All right? I'm not going to do that. Hey, Captain, let's start a disobedience. Why don't you be disobedient to your colonel and tell the colonel that this is a suicide mission? All right? And then we'll convince the colonel to convince the general that was to be disobedient. And then the general could be disobedient to the president of the United States so that we don't win this war. Okay? Is that what it is? That's not what it is. All right? So lack of peace and anger occurs. So what I've seen lately during this this COVID crisis is such with all of the issues that are coming out, the selfishness, the dissent and criticism, is Catholics criticizing the Pope, bishops and priests, Catholics protesting bishops and priests, Catholics, encouraging priests to disobey bishops, Catholics going to schismatic churches, right, so that they can have their mass. Okay, it almost that is unfathomable. There are so many great saints, especially like the saints of today, that would rather be a martyr than go to a schismatic church. Think about that, and yet they're just willing to do that, which is crazy. And fifth, Catholics purposely doing what they want to do. All right? So how do we transform ourselves so that we can become obedient and do our duty in the Catholic Church as well as the secular world? Okay? We have to do both. All right? We aren't bipolar here, right? I tell people if you can't take things in the natural order, okay, if you can't do things in the natural order, then how can we do it in the supernatural order? If we don't have the virtues in the natural order, then they can't be heroic virtue in the supernatural order. Grace does build upon nature. That's the fundamental. That's very fundamental. So if you don't naturally have the virtues, it's not like God's going to, make you something that you're not. So it's the same thing. If you're not going to do your duty in the natural order, how are you going to do it in the supernatural order in the Catholic Church? It only makes sense. It only makes sense that the same people who are disobedient to the Catholic Church are sometimes disobedient, or most of the time are disobedient in the secular world. They want to manipulate their own view of what it should be. Because true obedience and true duty is doing what you should be doing regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you think is right or wrong, from a reasonable standpoint, right? Certainly no moral law should be followed. No laws that are not morally moral should not be followed. And we'll talk about that. All right? So what are some solutions? Okay? The first solution is remove the personal side away from the office or position a person holds. What does that mean? That means that the president, the governor, the mayor, the pope, the bishop, the priest, the deacons all hold an office. You know that, right? A bishopric is an office, okay? The president is the office of the president, office of the governor. You remove your personal side. Trust me, I've had, colonels that I personally didn't like or captains I personally didn't like, but they held an office. They were in the office. They were commanding officer. There were, or they were, in an office that I had to follow. So by removing the personal things away, you can be a little bit more objective of of what they're trying to say or do. Okay? And remember, God put them in the office to lead and make decisions. I don't care if you like or dislike the president or the mayor or governor or pope or bishop. God put them there, right? And you say, "Wow, yes, God put them there. God put Hitler in power. He did. And you say, well, why? I don't know why, but what am I learning from it? Okay." It was a crisis, right? It was a crisis that occurred, and great men and women were able to call to defend in that time of crisis. God allows evil to occur. It does. He does. God does allow that to happen. So we have to remove the personal side away so that we can objectively analyze the policies, procedures that are being implemented by each levels of the office, like the president or the governor or pope or bishops. And we have to look at it from that standpoint, and be charitable in what they say or do in their policies. And we'll talk about that in item number 6. But just remember, take the personal side away, okay? Number 2, understanding the AO principle. AO stands for area of operation. In the military, everyone is assigned an AO, an area of operations, sometimes called an area of responsibility. It's the sphere of influence that we have in our own hands. So the first thing that we are responsible for, or our operation, for me, let's say, is myself. As I always say, we can only make ourselves saints. We can't make other people saints. We can guide, we can coax, we can discuss, yes, but we cannot make other people saints, okay? So our first responsibility is ourselves. That's our first area of operation. Am I becoming a saint? Am I obedient? Am I doing my duty? The second, as for me, is I'm also a father and husband. So husband, as a husband, my wife is my second duty and area of operation. Ensuring that we have a good relationship, ensuring that we are going towards heaven together. The third is my children. Fourth, my extended family. Fifth, my business. I have all these. So that's the area of operations. The Pope is not my area of responsibility. I have no influence over the Pope, no influence over the President of the United States outside of voting, right? And the governor, all right? And I choose not to be part of it, okay? Certainly, could I become a theologian and maybe, somehow move up the ranks of the clerical things? Sure, I could do that, okay? Maybe, I don't know. But that is not what God is calling me, nor is that what God is asking me to do, right? If he did, then he would have gotten me very excited and I would have been taking theology courses and everything else. But in this case, I am not. So we do have to look at it and say there is an area of operations that are out there that we're responsible for, that we are only responsible for, and that is, okay? A lot of common expression I use is, it's above my pay grade. When people talk about the Pope and bishops and all, it's above my pay grade. I am not there to make decisions or to influence people in that higher level. Okay? The second is, God will judge. God's not going to say to me, hey, how did you influence the Pope? God is going to judge me by how I influence my children and my wife to go to heaven and in the Catholic environment, and if I'm a saint. Okay? He's not going to say about the Pope. So why spend energy, time worrying about that? Third, is trusting God. Okay? God will hold those leaders accountable. Okay? God will. All right? I am not responsible for every soul in this world. I'm not. Okay? As I said, the only one I'm responsible for immediately is myself. And because I chose the vocation of the marriage state, my wife and my children. I'm responsible only to the effect that I create a Catholic environment. Even them, they can choose to sin and leave the church. All right? So trust in God. Trust that God will hold them accountable at judgment seat and that God will not let things fail. D, ignorance is bliss. Keep yourself. It goes kind of with the idea that, worry about your own responsibility. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Well, what so-and-so is doing with all this other stuff. That's just gossip. All right. And it leads to nothing but lack of peace. All right. So ignorance is bliss. All right. When people come up to me and say, do you know what Pope Francis just did? I'm like, no, I can't. It's above my pay grade. Can't think about that. Okay. Move on. Number 3 on this category of a solution of being obedient. Be merciful and have a team spirit. All right. If you have a team spirit, okay. I played football a lot. All right. No play runs perfectly. There's a lot of times where I was a running back, and as a running back, you rely on the linemen to protect you, right? They have to make a hole between the tackle and the guard, right? And let's say the guy goofed off and he didn't realize what the play was all about, or he missed the block or whatever it is. Do you know who gets crushed? I do. As the running back, I get crushed, okay? And I was only about 160 pounds, 5'5", and I'd be crushed by this guy who's like 6'1", weighing about 300 pounds. Think about that, weighing twice as much as I am and having at least a foot above me, being crushed like a little grape, right? It's very easy to get up and just start yelling at the lineman saying, you idiot, okay? You are an idiot. Why did you miss that, that block? But in reality, you can't have that. You have to have a team spirit. Hey, I just got crushed. We have to make sure we get this thing in there. We didn't make the touchdown, or we didn't do whatever. But the key thing is we do make mistakes, okay? And it's a team spirit. As a coach, when you're playing baseball, it's very hard to determine, should I pull a pitcher out or not? right? You don't want to lose the confidence in things. So it's all a judgment call. And as Catholics and Christians, we are to be merciful to our leaders and have that team spirit. If you want to get involved, in legitimate ways and not disobedient ways. If you can't, so in other words, yes, maybe you can get involved. Maybe you can get involved with politics. Maybe you can get involved with the church, but you get involved in legitimate ways that will improve and do everything else. If you can't, then God is not calling you, and you need to not worry about it. Okay, because it's a futile worry. I see plenty of friends who will spend literally an hour and a half, 2 hours talking about why Pope Francis or why whatever, when it's like, well, can you do anything about it? To me, it's a waste of time. It is. And again, how do you attract people to come to the Catholic Church if you're talking negatively about its church leader? Not a very good way of evangelizing. Number 5, we talk about trusting in God, right? He is in charge. All right? And Christ is focused not on why God is doing this, but what is God teaching me? During the COVID crisis, I learned several things. Instead of fighting this whole thing, why are we not having Mass? And trying to go around in circles. Why God? Why? Right? I really prayed and said, God, what are you teaching me? What are you really, really teaching me? And I learned 3 things, 3 lessons. One is, that I was taking the Eucharist for granted. Okay, that I was just going through the motions in some cases. So a more fervent, appreciation for the Eucharist. The second was the idea that of spiritual communion. A lot of times I was receiving Christ, so I just said, I figure I don't have to do spiritual communions. But it was a nice revigoration of spiritual communion. And lastly, the third was a deeper love for Christ. Why a deeper love for Christ? Because when lovers leave and don't see each other, they will bond stronger. You see, we think by being with a lover, we bond the greatest. And it's not. It's when we're apart that people grow, because we appreciate each other. We truly say, I love this person for what they are. So God gives us these things. So instead of saying, why God, say, what are you teaching me? Maybe you're teaching me patience. Maybe you're teaching me obedience. Maybe you're teaching me a sense of duty. Number 6, understanding the basic principle of duty and obedience. So this is a basic understanding, okay? The first is when doing any duty or obedience, we can never follow any type of policies or procedures that are against the moral law, okay? And not everything is moral against the moral law, okay? Against the 10 Commandments, killing, stealing, murdering, those types of things, okay? Not everything, but you would think a lot of people think that everything's moral. It's not. Paying taxes is not a moral issue, those types of things. But killing, murdering, and stealing is. So we never ever accept or accept any laws that will destroy God's moral law. Okay. Then after that, as long as we can determine that it's a moral law, okay, then we look it down and we see and we say to ourselves, are these laws reasonable? And something that's easy to follow. The answer is yes. If it's yes, then it's easy. You just keep following it, right? But there's a lot of gray area where our tendency, because of original sin, is the one of disobedience. We tend to take the gray areas, okay, the ones that are kind of unreasonable, right, with an disobedience, one of rebellion, okay? And that's our human fallen nature, right? When we were 2 years old, what's the 2 common things we say when you're 2 years old? No and mine. Selfishness and rebellion, right? Honey, I need for you to do that. No. No. Go wash your hands. No, right? It's original sin, and we need to fight that. So a true charitable Catholic will, and one who's actually growing spirituality, will fight that negative urge and will take those gray areas as an opportunity to grow in virtue. Even though I don't want to do this, even though I feel as though this is wrong or whatever, or reasonably unreasonable, I'm going to do it. Because remember, this is not about if it's morally right or morally wrong. This is really about maybe slightly unreasonable, or maybe you don't understand why this law is happening. It deals here with the fact that it's very easy for us to fall under the trap of disobedience because of our fallen nature. And if you want to grow in virtue of obedience, virtue of doing your duty, then I would say make your default behavior in obedience and doing your duty. That's how you will grow in virtue. Because your default behavior for most people is the fallen nature, which is disobedience. Okay? And as I say, if you can't be obedient in the natural order, it's going to be very, very difficult to be obedient in the supernatural order. All right? So, number 7, understanding the beauty of doing your duty. Now, I hate to say this, but we're out of time, but I would recommend reading the speech by General MacArthur, okay, at West Point. I'll read a little bit of it, an excerpt of it. I meant to read the whole thing, but I wanted to read some of it. Here's part of it. Duty, honor, country. Those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. There are your rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. Unhappily, I possess neither the eloquence of dictation, the poetry or imagination, nor the brilliance of metaphor to tell you all that they mean. The unbelievers will say they are but words, but a slogan, but a flamboyant phrase. Every pedant, every demagogue, every cynic, every hypocrite, every troublemaker, and I am sorry to say some others of entirely different character, will try to downgrade them even to the extent of mockery and ridicule. But these are the sum of things they do. They build your basic character. They mold you for your future role as the custodians of the nation's defense. They make you strong enough to know when you are weak and brave enough to face yourself when you are afraid. They teach you to be proud and unbending in honest failure, but humble and gentle in success, not to substitute words for actions, not to seek the path of comfort, but to face the stress and spur of difficulty and challenge, to learn to stand up in the storm, but to learn to laugh, yet never forget how to weep, to reach into the future, yet never neglect the past, to be serious, yet never take yourself too seriously, to be modest so that you will remember the simplicity of the true greatness, the open mind of true wisdom, the meekness of true strength. They give you a temper of the will, quality of the imagination, a vigor of the emotions, a freshness of the deep spring of life, a temperamental predominance of courage over timidity, an appetite for adventure over love of ease. They create in your heart the sense of wonder, the unfailing hope of what next, and the joy and inspiration of life. They teach you in this way to be an officer and a gentleman. And what sort of soldiers are those you are to lead? Are they reliable? Are they brave? Are they capable of victory? Their story is known to all of you. It is the story of an American man at arms. My estimate of him was formed on the battlefields many, many years ago and has never changed. I regarded him then as I regard him now, as one of the world's noblest figures, not only as one of the finest military characters, but also as one of the most stainless. Always for them, duty, honor, country, always their blood and sweat and tears as we sought the way and the light and the truth. And 20 years after, on the other side of the globe again, the filth of murky foxholes, the stench of ghostly trenches, the slime of dripping dugouts, those boiling suns of relentless heat, those torrential rains of devastating storm, the lowliness and utter desolation of jungle trails, the bitterness of long separation of those they loved and cherished, the deadly pestilence of tropical disease, the horror of stricken areas of war. Their resolute and determined defense, their swift and short attack, their indomitable purpose, their complete and decisive victory. Always victory, always through the bloody haze of their last reverberating shot. The vision of gaunt, ghastly men reverently following your passwords of duty, honor, country. And through all this welter of change and development, your mission remains fixed, determined, inviolable. It is to win our wars. Everything else in your professional career is but corollary to the vital dedication. All other public purpose, all other public projects, all other public needs, great or small, will find others for their accomplishment. But you are the one who are trained to fight. Yours is the profession of arms, the will to win, the sure knowledge that in war there is no substitute for victory, that if you lose, the nation will be destroyed, that the very obsession of your public service must be duty, honor, country. You are the leaven which binds together the entire fabric of our nation system of defense. From your ranks come the great captains who hold the nation's destiny in their hands the moment the war toss occurs. The long gray line has never failed us. Were you to do so, 1,000,000 ghosts in olive drab and brown khaki and blue and gray would rise from their white crosses, thundering those magic words: duty, honor, country. Others will debate the controversial issues, national and international, which divide men's minds. But serene, calm, aloof, you stand as the nation's war guardians, as its lifeguard from the raging tides of international conflict, as its gladiators in the arena of battle. For a century and a half, you have defended, guarded, and protected its hollow traditions of liberty and freedom, of right and justice. Let civilian voices argue the merits or demerits of our process of government, whether our strength is being sapped by deficit financing, indulged in too long, by federal patronalism grown too mighty, by power group grown too arrogant, by politics grown too corrupt, by crime grown too rampant, by morals grown too low, by taxes grown too high, by extremisms grown too violent, whether our personal liberties are as firm and complete as they should be. These great national problems are not for your professional participation or military solution. Your guidepost stands out like a tenfold beacon in the night. Duty, honor, country. That's some excerpts of his speech when he spoke at West Point as getting the medallion. So I encourage you to read his entire speech about that. But it's duty, honor, country. And so it is with all Catholics. Same thing. Duty, honor, the church. Thank you. Let's end it with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, we thank you. We thank you for giving us the church with its hierarchy, with its rules and regulations, that we know what our duty is as Catholics. May we always follow that duty. May we always be the soldier, the Marine, and Our Lady's Guard. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.